Hi, my name is Elizabeth Panera, and my case is Zelman versus Simmons-Harris. This was a 2002 United States Supreme Court case. This case deals with religious freedom under the First Amendment, specifically dealing with the Establishment Clause. So, the main question in this case was if Ohio violated the Constitution by creating a school voucher program where many families used the public tuition aid to send their children to religious schools. So the biggest question was, does that in and of itself violate the Establishment Clause? Now, for the parties to the case, we will start with the petitioners. These were Ohio officials that were defending the voucher program, including Susan Zelman, which is where we get the Zelman name in the case, who was the superintendent of the public instruction in Ohio. And then the respondents, who included Doris Simmons-Harris, which is where we get the Simmons-Harris part of the name of the case, and other Ohio taxpayers who were opposed to the way that the program was being used. So they didn't necessarily oppose the fact that Ohio was giving money to families, but it was the way that that money was being spent. So these respondents argued that the voucher program used public money in a way that supported religious schools, which they believe would violate the Establishment Clause. Now, looking at the basic facts of the case, we have to understand the background of this, which starts with the Cleveland school crisis. So, the background of the case starts with Cleveland's public school system, which was very, very weak. Ohio originally created this pilot project scholarship program to help fix problems in Cleveland public schools. The program gave tuition vouchers to parents in the affected Cleveland school district so that their children could attend the participating public or private schools. So it could go to either public schools or private schools, but the government left that fully in the hands of the parents, which is important. Other basic facts, like how the voucher program worked. These vouchers were distributed based on financial need. So it was based on how much the parents made and how much they would need to send their kids to school. Parents could decide where their children would attend. The program also provided tutorial assistance for students who stayed in public schools. This is very crucial to the case because the Supreme Court focused heavily on the fact that the money reached religious schools not because the government was sending it directly there, but because the parents made their own decisions. So why did this become a religious freedom case? This became a constitutional issue because most of the private schools participating in the program were religious. So in the 1999 to 2000 school year, 82% of participating private schools were religiously affiliated, and a whopping 96% of students that were using these scholarships enrolled in religiously affiliated schools. So a very, very large amount of the money for this program were going to those private schools, even if it wasn't by government choice. So the challengers argued that even if the program was technically open to religious and non-religious schools and public and private schools, the practical effect was that the public's money was still supporting religious education. So despite the beliefs of these taxpayers, they were still paying for schools that were maybe Christian or Muslim or whatever religion that the school believed. Their own personal money that they were earning was funding it. Which brings us to the legal issue. The legal issue related to religious freedom was whether the program violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The Establishment Clause prevents the government from establishing or promoting religion. So the question was, if a state gives tuition aid to parents, and most of the parents are using that aid at religious schools, is the state unconstitutionally supporting religion itself? Now, the court's decision was pretty split. The vote was 5-4, which is kind of crazy to me because that is not what I would expect out of this. But the Supreme Court held that the Ohio program did not violate the Establishment Clause. I see that as a win personally. The court reversed the Sixth Circuit, which had ruled against the program. Chief Justice Rehnquist wrote the majority opinion, joined by Justices O'Connor, Scalia, Kennedy, and Thomas. So the court's reasoning, they had a few reasons for their decisions. So at first, it kind of centered on the idea of true private choice. Um, the court said that a government aid program is less likely to violate the Establishment Clause when it's neutral toward religion and gives aid directly to a broad class of citizens who then direct that aid to religious schools only because of their own independent choices. So, in other words, the court said that the government wasn't choosing the religious schools, parents were. So, I think that if the program only allowed for parents to send their kids to religious schools, then that would obviously be a completely different issue. But because it was completely in the parents' hands, they said that this fell under true private choice and had nothing to do with the government. They also emphasized that the program had a really valid secular purpose. Cleveland's public schools were failing miserably, they were very bad. So, the purpose it served was to help these poor children stuck in a failing public school system. This is very crucial for young kids to have a good education. It wasn't created to promote religion, it was created to expand educational opportunity. So the court also noted that the program was neutral because it allowed religious schools, non religious private schools, public community schools, magnet schools, and tutoring assistants. So if the court had limited it to only some of those things, then they would be making decisions for the parents that the original intent of the program has nothing to do with. So if they said, oh, you can't send your kids to a religious school, then it would kind of go against this idea of true private choice. So the court wanted to leave it open ended to the parents so that they were able to decide for their own children where they would go. Now, my personal opinion, I agree with the court's decision. I think they made a great decision. I thought that it would be um, more unanimous than it was because a 5-4 vote is pretty close, you know. But I agree with their decision. I think the most important point is that the government was not directly funding religious instruction or forcing students to attend religious schools. The government gave aids to parents who were financially needy, and parents decided where to use it. So to me, that makes a very major difference. I think that the purpose of this program matters a lot. Ohio was trying to help children in a failing school district, especially low income families. Because the program didn't say you have to go to a religious school, it gave the parents options. And I think that educational boost that it gave these children were much more important than regulating what religious institutions they did or didn't want to send their students to. If religious schools were excluded just because they're religious, then the families who want that option would be treated unfairly compared to families who are choosing non religious private schools. Now, there is another side to it. I understand the argument on the other side. A large percentage of voucher students ended up at religious schools. So, whether or not that was the intent of the program, it's what happened. So, it's understandable that some people would see the program as publicly funding a religious education. The concern is that even if parents technically make the choice, the end result is still taxpayer money supporting religious schools. But I agree with the court that the Constitution should focus on whether the government itself is promoting religion, not these parents. The program was neutral and parent directed, which I believe made this okay. In conclusion, Zelman versus Simmons-Harris is important because it allowed school voucher programs to include religious schools as long as the program was neutral and based on private choice. The court's main point was that public aid reaching religious schools were through parents' independent decisions and completely separate from the government directly promoting a religion. I agree with the decision because it protects religious neutrality and parental choice. Thank you so much.